Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of May 1st, 2025. A lot has happened today, so let's get started. Well, let's now turn to the front line. There's a lot of important news, including several significant local breakthroughs. Today, the first reports came in that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to advance into the southeastern part of the settlement of Bogatyr during combat operations. We've been discussing the fighting for Bogatyr over the past 3 or 4 weeks, maybe even a month. It's been very difficult for Russian units. While the battles for Konstantinovka were ongoing, as well as for settlements like Ulakli, Daknoye and Kurakovo, the Ukrainian side managed to dig in heavily around Bogatyr and Alexeyevka, establishing additional defensive lines. That's why the Russian offensive in this sector has been so challenging. But as you can see, we've updated the map. This means that aside from expert opinions, there is also objective footage confirming the presence of Russian units in the southeastern part. Here's the footage published today by the Ukrainian side. We see 2 Russian soldiers trying to shoot down a Ukrainian drone near what appears to be a bus stop. The location has been geolocated. Right at this spot, Russian soldiers attempted to engage the Ukrainian drone, which clearly indicates that this area is already under firm Russian control, despite the fact that some Ukrainian drones are still operating there. Based on this footage, we've marked the southeastern part between Razliv and Bogatyr. At the same time, several pro-Russian, fairly reliable sources report that the Russian armed forces managed to push into the southeastern part of the settlement and consolidate their positions. So it's hard to say exactly how far Russian units have advanced, but according to some maps from pro-Russian experts, at least the first 2 streets, Zaryanova Street and Garage Lane, have come under Russian control. And, well, it doesn't really matter anymore, because if they've indeed managed to enter and secure the southeastern part, Russia will certainly make every effort to build on this success and push toward the northern and northwestern outskirts. Essentially, Bogatyr's days are numbered, and it's possible that by May 9th, the settlement will fall under Russian control. Once Bogatyr is taken, the Ukrainian armed forces will likely begin gradually withdrawing from Alexeyevka and preparing to retreat further northwest toward Novopavlovka. With the fall of Bogatyr and Alexeyevka, the next domino will likely be the line from Komar to Zaporizhzhia, then Novopavlovka, and eventually Moravka. In other words, all these territories, after the fall of Bogatyr and Alexeyevka, will probably, though not automatically and with some effort, come under Russian control. The Russian Federation will then approach the borders of the Dnipro region. Next, let's move to the Konstantinovka sector of the front, where a lot of information is also coming in. We'll start with the Kleban Beek Reservoir. If we look at the map, we can see numerous geolocated FPV drone strikes. As we've discussed many times, Russian forces have approached the next Ukrainian defensive line, which was heavily fortified. Currently, operations are underway to destroy mortar positions, FPV drone operator posts, various equipment, internet infrastructure, and cameras, essentially efforts to blind Ukrainian units in this sector as much as possible. After these operations, the offensive will likely begin toward Zarya, Staraya Nikolaevka, Romanovka, and Alexandrovka. For now, the front line here has become somewhat static. Very important footage is also coming in from the Toretsk area, specifically the mines in the northwestern part. Remember, the fighting for these mines has been going on for a long time. Last night, the first objective footage appeared, showing Ukrainian drone strikes on flags and banners raised by Russian units on the highest points of the structures. Here's a banner of some unit, likely one that participated in the fighting, and moments later, we see the Russian flag. It's clear that these flags weren't raised by drones, as they're fastened in multiple places, meaning soldiers likely climbed up and planted them. Still, given that drones are still active there, fighting likely continues. However, based on this footage, we can conclude that most of the mine is either under Russian control or in a grey zone, soon to be fully taken by Russian forces. In other words, the fighting for this stronghold, this fortified area, is nearing its end. Once Russian forces take full control of this territory, there will be virtually no obstacles or barriers left to the north. They will reach the Mokrai Toretsk River and the railway connecting the settlements of Shcherbinivka and Konstantinovka. effectively allowing Russia to advance toward the Kleban-Baik reservoir and Kleban-Baik from the east. This essentially marks the beginning, or perhaps the completion, of forming a cauldron or operational encirclement for Ukrainian forces south of the Kleban-Baik reservoir. Meanwhile, the Russian army continues its advance along the railway from the settlements of Druzhba and Dakhnoye towards southern Dylivka. Today, Ukrainian sources published footage of strikes on Russian assault troops gradually moving northwest along the railway. For now, we've made minor updates to the map, but more and more video evidence suggests that Russian forces are on the verge of fully securing the southern part of Dylivka. After that, they will again have operational freedom to advance north toward Oleksandr Shultain, Bila Hora, and of course, northern Dylivka. Very important news is coming today from the settlement of Chasiv Yar. Several pro-Russian experts note an expansion of the controlled zone north of the town. We expected that the Ukrainian defense would soon collapse in the central part, around the factories and high-rise buildings, and that, any day now, Ukrainian forces would retreat toward Nikolaevka. However, no such reports have arrived yet. Yes, daily posts from various experts claim Russian advances, but we can see that the offensive is progressing slowly. Still today, there was information about an expansion of control further north from Chasiv Yar toward a settlement called Maiska, located northwest of Chasiv Yar. This suggests the possible start of assault operations toward Markov-Maiska, aiming to widen the bridgehead along the Siversky-Donets-Donbass Canal north of Chasiv Yar. In the southern part, the expansion continues from Toretsk, while in the north, it's coming from Chasiv Yar. The wider this bridgehead grows along the canal on the Ukrainian side, the safer the offensive towards Siversk from the southeast and southwest will become. Next, let's move to the Lyman sector of the front. Recall that yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense and objective footage confirmed full control over the villages of Novoye and Lipov. Today, this was partially corroborated by pro-Ukrainian mapping services, which no longer show Ukrainian forces holding these settlements with certainty, instead marking them as grey zones. Additional updates from various cartographers indicate that Russian units have now fully cleared Novoye and Lipove and are gradually advancing towards Zelena Dolina. Yesterday, some sources already reported initial Russian movements into Zelena Dolina, but today we only see progress in that direction. With the distance shrinking, it's possible that as early as May 1st, the first clashes over securing the area will begin. Since this morning, there have also been reports of continued Russian attempts to storm the settlement of Redkadub. To recap, Russia's current objective is to establish control over this stretch of the front, from Zelena Dolina in the south to Redkadub in the north. Securing these settlements would effectively complete the formation of the northern flank, setting the stage for a further push south toward Lyman itself. These two settlements are decisive. Afterward, the battle for Lyman proper will begin. Maybe not for the town itself yet, but all movement will focus on closing in from the north, east, and possibly even the southeast. Further north, between Novomikhailivka, Novolyubovka, and Makievka, Russian advances have also been noted. This is confirmed by pro-Ukrainian cartographers, as well as footage released by Ukrainian forces of drone strikes on Russian assault troops slowly pushing through fields toward the north. For now, we've marked these as contested areas, but today's first confirmed footage proves this northward movement is real. Now we're moving to the Pokrovsk direction, where just before recording this video, we received important footage and crucial information. Today, in the settlement of Novoelenovka, Russian troops stormed into the village using motorcycles. Meanwhile, drones captured around 20 Ukrainian soldiers, fleeing the village without offering any resistance. This advance is highly significant because it provides an excellent base for Russian forces. The settlements to the south remain semi-encircled, and the neck of this encirclement has noticeably narrowed. Now, it will be much harder for the Ukrainian armed forces to supply their troops in this area, as Russian FPV drones can now reach their logistics routes. Well, of course, the most significant political event is the signing of the deal between the United States of America and Ukraine. Today, the U.S. Department of the Treasury published a short article on its website announcing this signing. On April 30th, the United States and Ukraine signed an agreement to establish a special fund, a reconstruction fund, and this fund will handle Ukraine's recovery through contributions from both the Ukrainian and American sides. There are certain details here, a large number of paragraphs, rules, and technical aspects regarding how this will be implemented. The document includes the names of various companies and organizations that will oversee this process. But overall, the agreement is quite interesting and very important. And of course, as soon as this information was published, everyone immediately began speculating about what this agreement means for Ukraine, what it means for the US, and how it will affect the ongoing combat operations along the entire front line, as well as Russia. A little later, Donald Trump also made a statement. "We've made a deal. We think it will, let's say, be upheld by the Ukrainian side," he likely wanted to add. "But we haven't seen any benefits yet. We haven't earned anything from this deal. We haven't actually seen any perks or interesting options." But then Trump added, "We will definitely see them. We will definitely see." Well, we'll see how this story ends, but I repeat, as soon as the first information about this agreement emerged, speculation began. Everyone is discussing what this means for Russia, for Ukraine, and in general, Americans are talking a lot about it, turning this signing into a grand historic event. And at first glance, it's immediately noticeable that it gives the impression that the Americans are artificially dragging everyone into a discussion about the clauses, paragraphs, and technical details of this deal, trying to divert public attention from the most important aspects of the agreement. And if you ask my opinion, as soon as this agreement was published, I immediately started looking for an answer to what I consider the most important question regarding it. And the most important question, in my view, is this: who exactly signed this deal on behalf of Ukraine? Who was it? Was it Zelensky, who somehow secretly flew to Washington and signed it quietly with Trump? Or maybe it was the Prime Minister who went to Ukraine and signed it, also a significant figure in Ukrainian politics. Or perhaps it was Stefan Chuk, the Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, who, from the Russian Federation's perspective, is the only legitimate authority and representative of Ukraine. Or, as a last resort, maybe it was Syrsky, the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, signing it as an act of surrender. Well, not surrender, but an act establishing this investment fund. But none of these four individuals, who, in principle, might have the authority to sign such a massive document worth $500 billion, pay attention to that figure, were in Washington or signed this agreement. A little later, I managed to dig deeper and find out who actually signed it. And here, before your eyes on your screens, is the person who signed the deal on behalf of Ukraine. A $500 billion agreement. This is possibly the largest deal in human history, signed by this person. Not Zelensky, not the Prime Minister of Ukraine, not Stefan Chuk, not Syrsky, but this woman. It was soon revealed that this is Ukraine's Minister of Economy, who signed a $500 billion deal. And this is actually the most crucial question and answer regarding this entire agreement. Shortly after, the ministers published a brief excerpt from the agreement, just the key points to understand what was discussed and what fundamental decisions were made. It's a lengthy document outlining pros, cons, mechanisms, and technical details. But from all of it, I highlighted a few key points, one of which is clause number 7. According to this clause, the agreement, signed by essentially a nobody, a person with no real power or authority in Ukraine, is sent to the Verkhovna Rada for ratification. So we see that a completely illegitimate person with absolutely no authority in Ukraine signs a $500 billion document, and now this document, signed by nobody, goes to the Verkhovna Rada for ratification. Essentially, this procedure was expected from Zelensky. He would sign it, and then the Rada would ratify it. But instead, we see a completely different person doing it. And of course, the Rada will ratify it, thereby giving the document some legitimacy. In other words, you could theoretically go to the US, sign an agreement with them, and then the Verkhovna Rada could ratify it, and suddenly your document, signed by some unknown person from the US, would gain legal force, at least for Ukraine. This is an absurd situation, but it is what it is. At the moment, this document confirms that the US also doubts Zelensky's legitimacy. Another interesting point about this deal is that for the first 10 years, all profits from this fund will be reinvested in Ukraine, into new reconstruction projects, technologies, and so on. That means for a decade, the money doesn't leave Ukraine. Only after 10 years and 1 day can the US start withdrawing these funds, possibly for the benefit of the fund managers or organizations involved in Ukraine's reconstruction. This 10-year clause is crucial because we must clearly understand. If something happens in Ukraine during this period, whether due to military operations, a revolution, another Maidan, or any other upheaval, and a pro-Russian leader comes to power, or, as the West likes to say, a Kremlin puppet, then this agreement, signed by a nobody and ratified by Ukraine's parliament under martial law, will be automatically cancelled. Effectively, the Americans are investing in this fund, not just in technology or equipment, but also in weapons. There are already reports that the US will contribute Patriot systems to this fund, which they might later reclaim in monetary form after 10 years. But again, if Ukraine's government changes within a decade, whether through a coup, Russia taking full control, or a pro-Russian leader coming to power, the deal is off and the US loses everything. There are many legal nuances on how this agreement could be terminated, but the key takeaway is this. The US will do everything in its power over the next 10 years to keep Zelensky or his team in power, because only then can they reclaim their investments. After that, they won't care what happens to Ukraine. This agreement is essentially a personal guarantee for Zelensky's team that the US will ensure the deal remains valid. It doesn't necessarily mean keeping Zelensky as president. They might replace him with someone else. But the agreement must stand. This appears to be the time frame Zelensky managed to secure, 10 years, because he knows that if pro-Russian forces take over Kiev, the Americans lose everything. That's how I see this agreement. We'll see how the situation develops, but one thing is clear. Under this deal, the US can also contribute weapons like Patriot systems to the fund, which will naturally be used in combat against the Russian Federation.